Hannah?
Absolutely am. So I'm going to introduce you like last time, and then we can get started. All right. So hello everyone, and welcome back to 1 Hour with Mary E. Wilkins Freeman, a series of online lectures about the author hosted by the Mary E. Wilkins Freeman Society. My name is Hannah Champion, and I have the honor of being the president of the aforementioned society. And today I'm thrilled to reintroduce, so back by popular demand, Brent L. Kendrick, a leading authority on Mary E. Wilkins Freeman. His decades-long devotion to her life and work includes editing the Infant Sphinx, collected letters of Mary E. Wilkins Freeman, which I keep by my side always, as well as her Green Mountain Stories. His forthcoming 2-volume biography, Dolly, Life and Letters of Mary E. Wilkins Freeman, draws from newly discovered letters and archival material and is set to become the definitive account of Freeman's complex and influential life. Dr. Kendrick is also the literary sleuth behind Unmasking the Humorist, Alexander Gordon's Lost Essays of Colonial Charleston, to be published in September 2025, so keep an eye out for that. In addition to his scholarship, Kendrick served for 25 years at the Library of Congress, receiving its Distinguished Service Award, and for 23 years as Professor of English at Laurel Ridge Community College. There he was honored for his teaching excellence on multiple occasions, and his classrooms became spaces not just of instruction but of transformation, where literature met life in daily lasting ways. So his talk today, entitled Mary E. Wilkins Freeman, The Biographer's Challenge, will trace Kendrick's long engagement with Freeman's legacy and discover or consider how new digital tools, uncovered letters, and even past biographers might offer a fuller, more complex portrait of the author. So Brent, over to you. I'm going to bring up your slides.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Hannah, for that introduction. And a special thank you and shout out to the Mary E. Wilkins Freeman Society and to your leadership. And, I am always praising what the society is doing. And when I told some colleagues a few weeks ago that I was doing this, and I said, it's an international group. And one of them responded, "Oh, I didn't know she had an international audience." And I kind of laughed and I thought, well, it won't be the first American. She wasn't discovered in Europe, of course, but maybe she'll be an American author who was rediscovered in Europe. And the work that you're doing, I think, is certainly helping that. And, I am so excited about the book that came out that you all did, New Perspectives on Mary E. Wilkins Freeman. And I'm excited about it, not only because I had a chapter in it about her as a businesswoman, but I think it is a new way, a new lens to draw attention to a writer who, while growing in popularity, I maintain, even if my colleagues don't know it, she's growing in popularity, but there is an awful lot of work to be done, not just for scholars my age, but I like to always hope that something one of us says will turn on a younger Freeman scholar or a young scholar, and who will say, oh, maybe this is something that I can do. So I'm delighted to participate again today and to be doing this. And Hannah, you mentioned that I had so many tidbits from the last time, and dare I say that I'm like the mosquito in a nudist colony. I know exactly what I'm supposed to do. I don't know where to begin. And that's the way it always is when I'm doing a Freeman talk, because, I have dedicated 50 years to Freeman. I can't believe that, and it hasn't been a nonstop commitment, but she's been there constantly. And that is a long time to spend working on a writer. And so, I've got all kinds of stuff, and most people don't want to hear it at all. And when I was thinking about today, I was thinking, not so much about Freeman close on to the Zoom call, but actually about a play, the Edward Albee play, Zoo Story, which you probably all know. And I love, because it reminds me of me at the beginning when Jerry approaches Peter on the park bench, and they don't know one another. And Jerry blurts out, "Hey, I've been to the zoo." And, Peter ignores him and he says, "Hey, mister, I've been to the zoo." And so that's kind of how I am with my research on Mary Wilkins Freeman. I'll try to corner anybody and say, hey, look at what I found on Mary Wilkins Freeman or what I'm doing. And I'll comment later. Inevitably, the response is who, but it doesn't keep me. So I just want to do a couple of show and tells like I did last time, Hannah, if you don't mind. Crazy things that capture my attention. I found this one, The Revolt of Mother, just a single story. I mean, one of her most famous stories, but also the one about which she said there never was a woman in New England like that she told the biggest fib of her life when she wrote that story. But I like it because I love books, and this is just a little standalone book, and it's published by Perfect Presence, who also did some other stories that I like A&P by John Updike. Anyway, it's just there. So what other show and tell do I have? Just very quickly, of things that capture my attention, because as a biographer, I don't always know where they lead. And I've been fascinated recently by Freeman books that are hitting the market in their original dust jackets. You all probably have these. I have a lot. But when one comes along, it's like, how does this survive? I mean, Alabaster Box from 1917, Doc Gordon, and I'm fascinated by it because the more books that I publish and the more I'm involved directly in my own publication efforts, I realize that sometimes there's information included on those dust jackets that's not included inside the book. And it may not be much, but it may be enough to lead to something. Even one like Silence and Other Stories, which I acquired recently. But more to the point of the biography that I'm working on, I love it when I come across association copies like this copy. Are you all seeing this? Okay. Yes. This copy of Pembroke, which was an association copy. It belonged from the library of Lulu Glaser, who was a famous American actress and was involved in silent movies. And it was presented to her by Landon in Philadelphia in 1894. And I haven't quite solved the Landon angle yet. I'm thinking that it's Sir Landon Ronald, who was a British orchestra leader who was in Philadelphia at that time, as she was. And you may be saying, well, why does it matter? Well, it does matter. Association copies like this matter to me as a biographer, because sometimes, probably not in this case, but in some instances, once I get that connection to somebody else, I can end up finding material in their archive. So they always make me sit up and take notice. And the one that I absolutely love, I'll take it out of the protective sleeve. It's one of my most valued recent finds, is Jane Field. And it is the association copy from the library of Thomas Hardy. And what I love about it is the fact that it has a letter from Mary Wilkins dated May 29th, 1894 to Den. And aside from the fact of being thrilled that there was correspondence there, I'm thinking maybe there was another somewhere else. For me really is the fact that these materials keep surfacing. And you wouldn't, I don't know, maybe I'm being naive.
Brent, just to say, I think that you might have muted yourself when you put something down on your keyboard, perhaps. I think you need to, I'm gonna see if I can do it myself. I think you're still muted. You just need to, yeah.
There we go. Am I back now? Okay. Did the Thomas Hardy stuff fade out? Was I muted then or just now? Okay, you're muted now.
Just for a couple of seconds.
Okay, that's good. And so where has it been all these years? I have no idea. Last year, I was thrilled to get the original manuscript copy. Not a lot of complete Freeman manuscripts exist of The Green Door. And I was thrilled to get that intact. And I'm still, so it makes me hopeful that even though Freeman has been dead for a long time, that there's still materials out there, and working on this new 2-volume biography, part of my goal is to continue ferreting out materials like that. So that's all of my show and tell, I guess. So let's move on to the actual, what I had in mind doing, the presentation. Thank you, Hannah. Okay. And are you going to do, okay, good. So the biographer's challenge is the title, as Hannah mentioned, and the subtitle, Truths Half Told. And that is always the case in working on a biography. You don't always have the whole picture. And it takes a while to try to figure out and even conjecture, and how much do you conjecture information that you don't have. Letters half burned, and I'll talk more about this later, over and over and over again, and tracking down friends and family members, distant family members of Freeman, people who would have had letters. You know, I got the sad response, oh no, mother burned those, or they got lost at sea. So letters half burned, and a legacy waiting to be fully heard. And I think it is. And I'll be talking about Edward Foster's biography toward the end, and I have great respect for it. But I always go back to it, and I think, you know, here's a woman who lived from 1852 until 1930, 78 years old, and imagine the world changes. We've experienced more in our lifetimes, but still, the changes that would have taken place. And his biography is 200 pages. So it's a little more than a page a year, but at any rate. And so Hannah's mentioned my Infant Sphinx and Green Mountain Stories. I'll talk about those in a minute. And I love it. You know, Hannah, I almost sent you a redo of this slide because I get in a certain mindset. And so I've had a couple of books come out this year. And so we've gone through this bit of announcing forthcoming. Well, it's coming out next month, or the forthcoming Unmasking the Humorous, which is coming out in September. So let me clarify up front for everyone. Forthcoming here is not actually a slip of the pen, but it probably would really be more accurate to say work in progress, because it is not forthcoming this year. Don't expect it. And I'm not one of those scholars who's willing to go out on a limb and say exactly when, because truthfully, I don't know exactly when at this point. It's going to be 2 volumes, and volume 1 will come out first. And I've really got to be certain that I've found the letters, particularly for volume 1. So next slide, if you would, Hannah. So what I want to do in my presentation is talk about a number of things. The biographer's balancing act. And it is, I mean, it really is a balancing act. How far do you go? How much do you conjecture? When do you stop? Missing pieces and burned pages. There are still lots of missing pieces. You know, I'm grateful for digitization because I'm finding a lot of those online. I want to talk a little bit about Green Mountain Stories and why I did it, and then more about the 2-volume new book that I'm working on, Dolly, which is Hannah, I loved it because your tongue almost got twisted a little bit, even in saying the Infant Sphinx. You know, that's just so hard. And so I like to think that looking at Freeman, that I've come a long way since 1985. You know, I wanted to be really academic then, I guess. And now I'm seeing Freeman more as the woman that she was, the person that she was. And so Dolly, and I'll explain that. And then we'll look a little bit at old biographies, particularly Foster and Thomas Schuler Shaw. And they are old, and I will explain why they're old and why, even though they're important, both kind of missed the mark in terms of timing. And then digital gold, and then we'll wrap it up with any questions that you all might have and information about how to contact me. So next slide, please. Okay, so we'll start with the biographer's balancing act, which I subtitled Truth, Silence, and the Temptation to Guess. There is always a lot of truth out there, but it's countered by an awful lot of silence, what's not said. And down through the years as a scholar, but also as a human being, I've learned to sometimes pay more attention to what's not said, to the silence. And I'm doing that an awful lot with Freeman, in terms of missing correspondence, things that close friends that she didn't write to close friends, the unsaid. So I'll talk more about that. And then the temptation to guess. And I'm not one to do that. And I'm not going to be guessing. I'm not guessing. I didn't guess in the Infant Sphinx in the 5 sections that really ended up being longer than Foster's biography, which is a lot of new material. I didn't guess. As far as I will go with a biography or anything like this is raising a question. What if? And I think that's fair, but I try not to guess. And that's particularly challenging when it comes to using newspaper reports. I remember when I did the presentation in May and someone asked a very thoughtful question, well, newspapers lie? What do you do with newspaper accounts? And my response was, and I'm still there, my response is, they do lie, but if you follow the threads enough, there's going to be a kernel of truth. There's going to be a nugget of gold there. So you have to go through and filter. Okay, next slide. So opening the archival door. And, we always begin with what's available. And you'll hear me saying this over and over again. The story often begins with what's missing. And I'm finding more and more with Freeman, it's not that it's missing, it didn't get fleshed out at a time when it might have. And I don't know to the extent to which I can flesh everything out. I'll give you just an example that occurred to me. Freeman's sister Anna was quite an accomplished pianist. And I sometimes felt that Freeman may have felt she was even in Anna's shadows during the Brattleboro years because the focus was on Anna, the accomplished pianist. And but Freeman herself liked music, and she taught music for a year in Brattleboro. And that hasn't really been played up that much. And yet I think it's important because, when she married Dr. Freeman and moved to Metuchen, and she had their house built with the proceeds from the shoulders of Atlas, I believe, or maybe it was the debt or one or the other. And, Freeman was very vain, and she had reddish auburn colored hair and a cat to match and a piano, get this, a piano to match. And she had all the floors and woodwork in that home done to match her hair. And I'm fascinated. And all that simply is to say that I think this musical angle is there, and I intend to follow up on part of that. So for me as a biographer, it doesn't start with the certainty. The certainties are there pretty much, many of them. I'm finding lots and lots. But it starts more with a curiosity. What about that piano and her lifelong interest in music? So the truth is slippery when you're working with the biography. Even letters are. We all know how we write our own letters. We select what to include and what to leave out. So letters can sometimes become performance in a way. And I think Freeman was good at that at times. And even memories, and I was looking at Foster's biography this morning, and one of the richest parts for anyone doing more research and using Foster, for me at least, one of the richest parts of Foster's biography is certainly in his biographical discussion, but the notes at the back, an incredibly rich resource. But as I look at those, I'm mindful that over and over and over again, a lot of his biography derived from memories, and I'm glad people who knew Freeman, but memories are curated. We choose what we want to say about someone, particularly when that person is famous. So those are challenges as well. And what may seem true needs greater scrutiny. And the great temptation is to speculate and embellish. And I can't do that as a biographer. I'll close gaps when I can, but I'm not going to imagine what those gaps are. And there are really lots of gaps that I'm focusing on, gaps that have been alluded to, but not, in my opinion, fully discovered and fleshed out. The relationship, for example, with her early suitors, that's kind of all vague, other than the connections. Her long relationship with Mary Wales, which continued all the way up until death. And, and there is a temptation to conjecture what was the nature of that. And even with Dr. Freeman, when she married and moved to Metuchen, everyone knew from the beginning that it was going to be a disaster. He was known to drink too much, and he was known as a womanizer. And Mary Freeman discovered the hard way that that was really true. There are lots of records there. I'll take that back. There are records. They're in newspaper accounts, and they're in other people's biographies, a tidbit here and a tidbit there. So for me, when I'm holding the Freeman letter, I'm looking at it, I'm trying to listen. It's not that, aha, here is a revelation. I'm trying to listen. And just as an example, everyone, the Mary Wales bit, one of the letters that I acquired last summer before, was a letter from Freeman. And how on earth did it end up on the market? I have no idea. A letter from Freeman to Harper & Brothers, giving Mary Wales the copyright, the money, all the proceeds for people of our neighborhood. And she secured that legally so that Mary Wales would have it. That to me says an awful lot about that relationship at the time. And particularly when you think about, the people of our neighborhood. And Foster said that a lot of people in Randolph made the claim that Mary Wales made the balls that Mary Freeman threw. So if you think of it as a softball, and Mary Wales is shaping them and Freeman is throwing them out into the market, and the fact that she gave people in our neighborhood the royalties from it to Mary Wales, there's a lot there, and there's a lot more to be discovered. At the same time, there's a lot to be said when Mary Wales died and Freeman went to court because she had loaned Mary Wales $5,000 and it never got repaid, and Mary Wales' brother wouldn't repay it. So there was a litigation there. So the great temptation with all of those things. So I hold them and I look at them, and more often than not, they're leading me to other places. Next slide, please. I'm looking to see. I can go on for a day on one slide. Missing pieces and burned pages, and I've already talked about that. But as the biographer, and you all are scholars, just think about it for a minute. She died and had no children. Fine, that's not a big deal. She died and had no will. That gets a little serious when you're a writer. I mean, it really does. The funny thing is, I have fragments that I've gotten of wills. So she toyed around with wills. And even in Metuchen, a teenager who typed some of her Freeman's manuscripts when the woman in Metuchen, Lois Lord, was a teenager. Freeman was always telling her that she was going to remember her in her will, and she didn't. So you're a famous writer and you die at the height of the Depression and you have no will, no children, and to make matters worse, you have no literary executor. For me, that's truly, truly big, because if a writer isn't in print, they're forgotten very, very quickly. And if you look at Freeman books, in print, out of print, so she died in 1930, and gradually they start going out of print because there was no one to keep them in the public eye. And if you're not in the public eye as a writer, then scholars aren't going to pick you up, and you're not going to be anthologized. We all know what happens to that. And then the last part here, a trail of letters scorched by loyalty. And I'm calling it loyalty now. I guess it is. And I'll talk about that a little more in the next slide, Hannah. So you open the file cabinet and you expect to find a lot. And I have found a lot. When I started working on the Infant Sphinx, I would find a group of letters here. University of Virginia, for example, has a relatively strong collection, New York Public Library. And initially, it was like, do I have enough letters? And so, I spent 10 years finding the total of 517 letters that's included in the Infant Sphinx, numerically 510, but at the last minute, multiple scholars found some really good letters and sent them to me. And the book was too far along in the printing process, so I would be like 499A or whatever numbering scheme. So there's a total of 517. That is not an awful lot of letters for a woman who lived as long as she did and who wrote a lot of letters, and she did write letters. And of that 517, a lot of those letters are business letters, not particularly fascinating ones, but I'm fascinated by them when she lies right out of her mouth and says, I don't know much about business customs. Well, balderdash. I mean, that's nonsense. Her dad was a dry goods merchant and, made regular trips to New York City, buying trips to bring stuff back. And I'm convinced that Freeman was writing some of the ads that appeared in the Brattleboro. So she knew a lot about business customs. So yeah, there's stuff there. So 517, and right now I haven't done a count recently, and I should. I think I have ferreted out probably 70, 80 more letters. That's a lot, when the base was only 517. And I will talk more about that later when I get to Dolly. The protection that erased her, that's really, for me, really, really sad because, again, some of her closest friends who knew her for decades, I tracked down their heirs, their children, and at least on 2 occasions, I got, oh no. And this is where you can't conjecture. I won't conjecture as a biographer, but when you hear someone say, "Oh no, those were much too personal. Mother burned them," it's like, well, hello. And so, but it doesn't invite conjecture, but you have to think about it. And then on one occasion, someone was traveling and the trunk got lost at sea or in travel. And so those are gone. And that happened over and over and over again, and I'm particularly saddened, always have been, that her close friend, Evie Severance, who died in Brattleboro and then Brattleboro Home for the Aged. And, only a couple of letters exist, and I know Freeman wrote. So who knows? More of those may actually surface somewhere along the way. So the archive becomes kind of a patchwork, and you look at periods like this is, this period's fairly complete, but this is really not. Freeman's New Jersey years really are not complete. They're really not. I don't know if Foster was in a hurry doing that part or just didn't have the materials that I have now, that other people have now. Letters of feeling, not disclosure. You can pick up an awful lot in Freeman's letters if you read them carefully, particularly letters to Mary Louise Booth, her editor. There was obviously a close relationship there. Freeman visited Booth often in New York City, and Booth's partner, Mary Wright. So it is kind of it's a patchwork, and I just keep putting it together. But the more I think about the fact that she earned her living through the power of her pen, and she did. What she achieved from the time she started out, when she found herself alone in Brattleboro and made that decision. She could have stayed there because she had title to half the Wilkins block, so she could have stayed there. They were renting apartments out upstairs, and she chose, but she was smart. She kept that property. That was actually the last thing that was sold after she died. It was the last thing that was sold after she died. And it was bought by the Brattleboro Home for the Aged, interestingly enough. But the fact that she held on to that property, and when she married Dr. Freeman, even and they would make trips back to Brattleboro, and the newspapers were, filled with Mary Freeman is going to move back to Brattleboro. So she was savvy, and she knew how to navigate those waters, but she really loved to put up. I think it was a persona in many ways. I mean, even toward the end of her life, and she wrote until the end of her life, she would complain to Harper and Brothers that she wasn't getting enough money to even buy the Thanksgiving turkey. And it's like, and I find that funny that has that persona, because the point I make over and over again, the woman who started out with less, if you exclude the value of her half in the Steen Wilkins block, and the actual cash that she had, and through the power of her pen, ended up with an estate that today would be worth $5 million thereabouts, and it got auctioned off at ridiculous prices. She knew exactly what she was doing. I mean, she had stock in gold mines in Africa. I mean, she had stock all over the world. So anyway, next slide, Hannah. And if anyone has a question, please ask as I go along. So Green Mountain Stories, I want to give the background a little bit behind it and why I did it. It was one of those larky things that you decide to do, and it's like, why not do it and just see? And I'm still seeing. But during my 50 years of doing research on Freeman, one of my favorite things to do, it doesn't matter who it is, I'll go into a library, stop a person on the street. I'm Jerry. Hey, mister, I've been to the zoo. And I'll stop people and I'll say, hey, I'm working on Mary E. Wilkins Freeman. And I always get, who? And I have to explain. So that's one of the reasons it's really great to talk to the Mary Wilkins Freeman Society. I don't have to. And when I go back to Brattleboro, it's like, I don't have to explain who I always do, but I don't have to. But I get that who. And it doesn't matter where I get it in Randolph. I've gotten it in Brattleboro. I've gotten it in Metuchen. And it occurred to me, and I think I'm on target with something here. When you've got a writer strongly identified with 3 states, who really claims her? So born in Massachusetts, and that part is relatively well documented in her life, but moved to Brattleboro, and I'm trying to flesh out that part more fully. But I really don't think that people have ever quite understood the important role that Brattleboro played. She really apprenticed as a writer during her Brattleboro years. It was in Brattleboro that she started writing children's poems, short stories for children. And that was for a 10, 15, 16-year period of time. Now, I think that part of the reason that might have been overlooked when Freeman went abroad, went to Paris, and she had to have a passport, she lied about her age and made herself 10 years younger. And she had been lying about it anyway, because she wanted, Dr. Freeman was younger, and she didn't want that to be that she was older. So she lied about that 10-year period. Well, if you start doing your math on that, then it kind of wipes out, unless you're paying attention to the detail, it kind of wipes out the 10-year period in Brattleboro significantly. So born in Massachusetts, launched her career, really launched it in Brattleboro, moves back to Massachusetts, then moves to New Jersey. So really, who claims her? And I think it's kind of a toss-up. And what I've observed, even in scholarly publications, no one state claims her. They really don't. I maintain that Vermont should, not only because she launched her career. Well, I don't know that any one state should, because it starts boxing her in as a regional writer. And I think she's more important than that. But I think Vermont has the right to claim her because she launched her career there. And I remembered when I was editing the Infant Sphinx, and I came across a letter from her to Mary Louise Booth, and they were debating the title of her first collection of stories for adults, An Humble Romance, which I detest. It's just horrible. It's bad. It's hard to say. But it was a traditional way of titling collections of stories, and you give it the the title of the book and other stories is the lead story. And so they had agreed on an humble romance. And then Freeman didn't like it. Mary Louise Booth didn't like it. And there was this exchange of letters. And, Freeman said, Mary Wilkins said, I don't like the title. And Booth came back and said, well, what about Green Mountain Stories? And Freeman said to the effect, well, I suppose you mean by Green Mountain Stories, Vermont stories, and that's all fine and well, something like that, even though I don't think I mentioned any mountains. And so they had agreed that the title was going to be Green Mountain Stories. And it actually got advertised in some papers as Green Mountain Stories, and some papers under Harper and Brothers. In some papers, it was advertised as an humble romance and other Green Mountain Stories. So there was this mix with the advertising. And then Mary Louise Booth went on a vacation to Europe, and no phone to call, no, you can't message her, you can't send her an email. And I am convinced that while Mary Louise Booth was away, there was a slip in the official, getting Harper to get the message, do this under Green Mountain Stories. That's what I have explained in Green Mountain Stories, which I love the book. And really the whole point of it was for me to kind of make a claim that Vermont needs to claim Mary Wilkins Freeman more. And in case you're wondering about, how many million copies I sold of that, I don't know, certainly not a lot. But I'm still trying to push the book in Vermont libraries. And whenever I had a chance, I say to Vermont educators, shame on you, regardless of what age, what school age they're teaching, shame on you if you're not including a Mary Wilkins Freeman story, because they're all out there in public domain and you can get them online. So that's kind of my background. So it's really I didn't do it just for the title, and I didn't need to do it for the book. But I did it because I'm hoping that it draws more attention to Vermont and Freeman. And I think that Vermont period is still a very, very, very rich period to explore. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, the next one, Hannah, I've already talked about that one. Okay, so Dolly, Life and Letters, Mary Wilkins Freeman. Initially, as I started finding more letters, and often they found their way to me, somebody would reach out and say, I've got this letter, do you want to buy it? Well, yeah, hello, I do. My big worry is that people have letters and that they will die, and the people will die, not the letters, and that her handwriting is so bad. I mean, if you've looked at, facsimiles or and Infant Sphinx or anywhere else of her handwriting, it's almost illegible. And Mary Louise Booth, when Freeman sent Two Old Lovers to her, thought it was the work of a kid, a youngster. It's really hard to read. And so my big fear is that there are letters out there and somebody's going to die and nobody's going to know who is this. I picked up on eBay 10 years ago, I guess, a sketch in purple ink. It's a study of a child sleeping. It's exquisite, absolutely exquisite. And at the top, you can hardly read it. Mary E. Wilkins Randolph. And I know, and I got it, I won't say what I got it for. I got it, it was theft. And I know I got it because nobody could read the signature at the top. So things are out there and they will continue to surface. So as people say, do you want, and I say yes, and I literally go looking for letters and I managed to get a good number. But initially when I started finding letters, initially 8, 10, 12, and I thought, all right, fine, I'll do an article in a magazine adding these letters. Well, when it adds up to the number of letters that I've now found, particularly when I add to that new biographical material that I have ferreted out from newspapers. Freeman was a household name. And with newspapers digitized and online, there's a lot of biographical information there. And I realized that one volume wouldn't do it. I mean, the Infant Sphinx is already big. And so I thought logically, for a number of reasons, 2 volumes would work. The first volume will be the New England years. It's just a kind of a nice clean divide. And the second one will be the New Jersey years. And in those, the whole thrust really is not the whole thrust, but part of it is Freeman moved and she shifted. And she was a savvy businesswoman, but she also reinvented herself. And she worried when she moved to New Jersey that she wouldn't have the same materials, but she managed. It wasn't always of the same caliber of the earlier stories, but she managed to take the New Jersey material and work it in the same way. She would go to an auction and get a shawl or something, and there became a story. And so I think her biography morphs in the same way. And I mentioned the Infant Sphinx. I love that title when I came up. Well, I didn't come up with it. Henry Mills Alden called her the Infant Sphinx. And the Alden family knew her well. And, he made the comment that she was so wise and old in some ways, and so infantile in others. And he called her the Infant Sphinx. And I thought that captured her. It really did, because she was wise and old, but she was infantile too. I mean, she would deliberately speak in a very low voice, not always that audible, because she discovered if she did, people would listen. And so she was the quiet voice in the room, which you don't always expect. And so I have since shifted, because the woman that I've been discovering since I've been working on this 2-volume book is just that. She's more of a human being. I mean, she really is a human being who had sorrows and joys, and all the awards, accolades that came her way late in life, which were fabulous. So now that I'm late in life, I can identify with those a little bit more, because I remember Hamlin Garland talking about, when she got the William Dean Howells Gold Medal in Fiction. His correspondence about the occasion is fairly rich. And he made the comment that sadly it came perhaps too late for her. And in many, many ways, I guess it did. But she's a very real person, and her friends down through the years, even before she moved to New Jersey, but particularly during the New Jersey years, called her Dolly, largely because, one of her close friends says the eternal feminine shone through in her. And she walked like an angel going across the floor on tiptoe, so soft. And I don't know, I kind of like that image of Dolly, and I think it holds true. I'm still fascinated by the fact that when she went for to receive the gold medal, which I'm still looking for, by the way, if any of you happen to get a tip as to where it's got to be somewhere. When she went to the American Academy for that, on that occasion, her big concern, and I can relate, was what to wear. And so the picture that she's in with Hamlin Garland was a gray dress with rose in it somehow, and her hat was gray with rose underneath. She was buried in that, by the way. I don't know if that's I don't know how I know that, or what. Maybe that's in Foster. I don't know. I didn't make it up, but that's what she was buried in. So yeah, so it's going to be called Dolly: Life and Letters of Mary Wilkins Freeman. And next slide, please. And I think I've gone through all the bullets on the next one, and I got carried away. Let's see if there's anything I left out. Yeah, New Jersey. I want to do, and even with New England, certainly Massachusetts, those early years gave her that foundation, and it did. But I think it gave her that mindset. I don't know that it gave her that literary foundation that she got in Brattleboro. And let me explain very briefly what I mean by that foundation. When I first read Freeman, I had never heard of her as a graduate student. And I too said, who? And I read A Humble Romance, and then I guess Two Old Lovers, and I kept going. And what I picked up on immediately, and I hadn't read Foster at that point, I picked up on the fact that she has strong characters, not just strong women. She has strong characters. they're often warped, but aren't we all? They're often hell bent on getting to wherever it is they're going to go, and they're going to get there. I mean, they're doggedly stubborn, and I like that because I am too. And I grew up poor, and Mary Wilkins grew up poor, and I can relate. And I pick up an awful lot on, Foster calls it pride and poverty. And if you look at so many of her stories, it doesn't matter who it doesn't matter the nature of the story even. There is this pride and poverty. You may be poor, but you can still strut your stuff and make a claim. I think she got that foundation not only through her family, but Randolph was a boot factory town, so they didn't have an awful lot of money. And so when they went to Brattleboro, it was an ascent in a way. It was a step up because Warren Wilkins, her dad, who had really been I love the word housewright, the carpenter, if you will, and Randolph. Though I don't want that to sound as if I'm discrediting his talent, because I've got architectural drawings of his, and they are really exquisite. He was exceedingly talented. But when they moved from Randolph to Brattleboro, that was a step up for them. It was a new beginning, and they could hobnob with the literary people and the business merchants in Brattleboro. So there was the ascent. And then she goes back to, and it was during that time that that's when she started networking. I mean, that's when she started being published as a children's writer, discovered that network of editors, and that helped her when she decided to move on to stories for adults. And then she moved back to Randolph and continued. I mean, she continued what she had been doing until, and I can't believe, well, I won't say it. Well, I will say it because I have said it before, until she got some crazy notions in her head that she ought to fool around with novels. And she was not the best novelist, in my opinion. And I call it the way it is. My favorite, I guess, is probably Jane Field. I do like that. And I salute, only because of the subject matter and her boldness in doing it, and the stunt, Shoulders of Atlas, with Max Pemberton, America versus England, and she won, but just exploring the whole topic of homosexuality so openly at that time, I think is important. And then, she goes to New Jersey, and there's continuity there, but she's fooling around with new subject matter and with new technologies. I mean, doing Pilgrim's Progress for the silent movies. I mean, she kept reinventing herself and collaborating with people as Florence Morse Kingsley, as she did in Alabaster Box. So yeah, that's all I had on that one, Hannah. Thank you. Next slide. So old biographies, and am I doing all right on time, Hannah? Yes? Yeah, I'm doing okay. So just a couple of things on old biographies and new lenses. And those old biographies really, they really are, they're important. And what would I do without Edward Foster, for example? But there are some things that people need to keep in mind when they're using Foster, particularly Foster, because his work is published. And I'm trying to find my copy. I've got multiple copies. So here's the important thing that people need to keep in mind with Foster. Right after, he was savvy. He was a student at Harvard. And right after Freeman died, he decided he was going to do a biography of her. And he did. And it was accepted by his doctoral committee. And I met Foster on a couple of occasions. And that's the one thing that I guess I was much younger when I met him, and I was too polite, I guess, to say, why didn't you finish your degree at Harvard? He didn't, and he left, and he went into teaching, and he ended up in Georgia. And so he finished his biography in 1933, I think, 34, and put it aside. And then in the 1950s, he resurrected it and decided that he would publish it. I'm guessing that you all are guessing why I'm thinking this is significant. That's a 25-year period. All the old people, by and large, whom he had interviewed at her death were dead. So he couldn't go back and refresh his notes. And to his face, I did to his face, and I still do now. I've always regretted he didn't keep his working notes. So, we have the doctoral dissertation complete, but we all know what we do. There's an awful lot that you can't include in a dissertation. There's an awful lot that you can't include in a book, probably for good reasons. But for a biographer, it's a sort of thing I'd love to have. What did he leave out? Because there might have been some truth there. So there was this 25-year delay in his publication. But it's still, it's funny. He didn't date it, but I first met Foster when he was living in Atlanta, and I don't know if that's even readable, but that's okay. And so he gave me a couple of Freeman books, but I had bought his biography, and he signed it for Brent Kendrick, demon researcher and swell guy. Early on in my research, he said to me, I hope you have better luck than the other graduate students I have advised. Well, I ignored it and kept on pestering him with my letters. And then he said to me at one point, well, they're not very good. They're mostly short business letters. And I moved on past it. And then he said to me, well, you seem hell-bent on this, so you just as well do it. And the more letters I found, the more delighted Edward Foster was. So there was another biographer working on Freeman when she died. And that was Thomas Schuler Shaw. And I have a great affinity to him because he was working at the Library of Congress when she died. I was not, let me assure you, working there in 1930, but he was. And he was a librarian, and for some reason decided that he was going to do her biography. So he too, like Foster, reached out to people who were alive through letters, and he finished his project. His lens, in my opinion, and I value the plus thing for Thomas Schuler Shaw is he was a librarian. And he had the good sense, not that scholars don't, but he had the good sense as a librarian to preserve his records. And so after his book was rejected by a number of publishers, including Harper, he converted everything into scrapbooks, and they're at the Library of Congress. And the biography in and of itself, a New England Puritan, 19th century Puritan, leaves a lot to be desired. And I look at it, and I don't mean this through critical eyes, because he did it not long after she died. The focus was too narrow, and I think he was too hell-bent on exploring the Puritan angle instead of branching out more. So he put that aside, and it never got published, but it's still a very rich resource. And I draw on it freely. Well, not freely, with approval. I tracked down his widow, who gave me permission to use it. And I've always laughed at the letter that she wrote me, because she said she could never for the life of her figure out what Tom, her husband, saw in that woman. So there may have been some rivalry there. I don't know. But those two early books are part of the evolution of the Freeman narrative of filling in an awful lot of gaps. So I guess in many ways, Hannah, the next slide, I keep forgetting that there's a bulleted slide after it. So I'm trying to honor what came before, and I mentioned the two major ones. There are lots of short articles and things that I'm using as well. The letters keep coming. At some point, I'll have to do at some point, sooner rather than later, what I did in 1985, of simply saying it includes all known letters. And I suppose if more come along after volume 1 comes out, I can figure out a clever way to weave them in. And I've already explained why I shifted from Sphinx to Dolly. It's a fuller, more human connection. Next slide. Digital gold, why it had to happen and why it had to happen now. Uh, it couldn't have happened, and obviously it didn't happen in 1985. But now with so many resources and every day, I mean, depending on what libraries you're exploring, more and more material is being digitized and available online. And oftentimes that includes letters, but it sometimes includes diaries and other materials. So that's kind of the impetus for doing it now for the last, and by now I'm talking about the last 10, 15 years. It's out there and I can do it. So Hannah, next slide, please. We didn't have those tools then. And I really do. I love librarians and I love technology. Hannah and I were talking about ChatGPT. I love AI. I can't wait to get my humanoid robot, to do work that I don't want to do. And all these discoveries in real time. And so I'm kind of now looking at it as the crowd, the cloud, and the collector, because I'm constantly, and I'm putting that word out to you all, please. You're out and about probably more than I am. But, if you find a tidbit here, something there, and you think, well, it's little, but it might be worthwhile, call it to my attention and share it with me. And, I'll give you credit somewhere along the way. I really will. And so it's just, the time is really good now. Probably 8, 9 months ago, I have a blog, creative nonfiction essays. It started when I was doing Unmasking the Humorist. But now it's just my own creative nonfiction essays. And some woman who had a really impressive Freeman collection that someone she was engaged to had given her, and he died, and she decided she was going to get rid of it. She wanted to keep it intact. And she tracked me down and offered it to me. She wanted to offer it to a library, and she couldn't find a library that wanted it. And that seems so sad, but I know it firsthand. My material is going to the University of Virginia, but it's very difficult to get a library to take on a collection because it's got to be cataloged, it's got to be housed. There's so much work behind the scenes that libraries don't always want them. And so I said to her, well, I'll buy it. And I only did it, truthfully, I did it because one of the books had a Freeman letter in it. And I thought, if I don't take the whole kit and caboodle, I won't get the letter. So my goal with that collection is I've kept it intact. And she sent me a catalog of it, very detailed. So that will stay intact as a little subset. And scholarship without borders. I mean, again, I'll go back to saluting the Mary Wilkins Freeman Society. Isn't it fantastic that a group dealing with a Who writer is working with people from all over the world and doing it in dynamic ways like this? And so it is scholarship without borders. And I really like that. I love, scholarship. I love books without borders too, but I love picking up a book. There's just something special, and give me really good laid paper and a decal edge. Oh my God. When I taught creative writing, I would always do booklets with my classes. They always knew if I had done it because I liked the paper, I liked the font, and I would always try to include a couple pieces of vellum in it. And so, no, to answer your question, Dolly will not have any vellum in the book. So scholarship without borders. Next slide, please, Hannah. I'm staying on time pretty well, I saw. So final thoughts and connections. If you'll go to the next slide, I think, and then I will just ask. Yeah, I'll pause at this point to ask, do any of you have a question that you want to ask? One that I can answer,
yes,
or not.
I do have one question. I'm very much a Mary E. Wilkins Freeman amateur. I'm an academic, but I haven't really done any work on her. I regularly used her, A New England Nun, in all kinds of classes. And I can state, well, I haven't been teaching just real recently, so I'm a little bit, I'd say, prior to the social media era. People, and I will get to my question. I just wanted to say real quick, it surprised me that colleagues would say, you're teaching that? And sometimes it'd just be in a composition class, like a writing about literature class. They couldn't imagine that the students would enjoy reading it. And of course, we often are told that students only want to read, like current things or things that are going to relate to them. And I was always surprised. Students would always, I would prepare them. I'd say, this isn't going to be like what you would normally choose to read, but just give it a chance. You'll like it. And they always had great discussions about a New England nun, and just and enjoyed it, and talking about how she was somewhat like people they knew, but she was a foreign to them. And so anyway, so I've always been a Mary E. Wilkins Freeman enthusiast. But my question is this: I didn't know that she died without a will and without a literary executor. So I'm just curious, who got the proceeds of her estate?
Yeah, that's a good one. And Ken, Hannah, do I have time to continue to respond? Yes. Ken, let me respond to the first part. I love where are you? Where do you live?
Well, actually, I'm in the Atlanta area. I teach here.
In Atlanta. Okay. If I were nearby, I'd pull you in and give you a hug, because I teach. No, I would. I teach. I love that you see. I teach New England nun too. Now, when I do it, I bring in a lot of, there's a lot going on in that story that students sometimes miss.
Yes.
Until I call attention to the color of the aprons and Louisa's biggest fear that, the dog's Caesar's going to get loose and go on a rampage.
Right.
How happy she is that she doesn't have to marry Joe Daggett. And so I go into all the Freudian stuff on that. But I auction off my stories when I teach literature, because I want to get my students engaged and talking. And I know they're not going to want to answer a question, but they get used to it. And I'll go in and I'll say, all right, we're going to start by auctioning off a New England nun. Anybody give me a 10? And I'll jot down. And 9, and then I keep going. And the way I handle it is I'm as interested in the ones who are 4 or 5. I never get that with New England nun. I find that when I teach 19th century American literature, that is probably one of the most favorite stories. And it's not because students know what I'm doing with Freeman. I don't tell them that up front. It's because they genuinely like the story and they can identify with it. They don't find the dialect to be heavy-handed. And they do know some people who are obsessive compulsive like Louise Ellis. And they do know people who get stuck in their ways. So I'm delighted that you're teaching it and that you had that response. So who got the proceeds? It's an important thing for all. Well, for me, I'm squared away. I've got everything, I've got a trust and I know where mine's going to go. But I'm always saying to people, you don't have a will. You better check the laws of your state to find out what will happen if you die with no will. Because in most states, and New Jersey was one, everything got auctioned. Thomas Brown was the executor. He was the lawyer that she knew over in Perth Amboy. And I suppose he went to court and had, got himself appointed as executor. But everything got sold at auction and divvied up amongst all the heirs. And you would be amazed at how many kith and kin come out of the woodwork when someone dies.
So it was like the children of her cousins and things like that it was like biological heirs.
Cousins and children of cousins, and there were kin people on her dad's side, on both sides. I believe, and I'm just pulling this out of thin air, but I'm kind of accurate because I was always surprised. I believe there ended up being 13 or 14 people who came forward. And so the estate was, and I don't know, and I don't know that the records even exist. There is, of course, an awful lot of administration fees with an estate like that. So I don't know what Thomas Brown got, but at auction it brought a little less than $300,000. That's a lot of money at the height of the Depression. I mean, but her house, she has such a phenomenal collection of Oriental rugs and jewelry and gold, and owned stock in railroad companies. I mean, it was a big amount. So it went to her heirs, whoever they actually were. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess what I meant was, if I was assuming it probably went to biological heirs, biological family of some sort, but because that's usually how it happens. I just didn't know if maybe there's anything unusual about how her.
Unusual to me in that, when you read, for example, Foster, and he wouldn't have known because he hadn't gone to the courts to do the research. You only have the notion that there's 1 or 2 cousins. There were others. It's simply that he didn't he didn't find out about them. So, yeah. So, okay, good. I appreciate that question.
Just jumping off that question, is there a list of the items that went to auction somewhere? Do you have a copy of this list?
Yeah, I do, and and I'm embarrassed. I'm a bad parent. I can't always remember what's in the Infant Sphinx. I know that I highlight a lot of those in the Infant Sphinx. Yeah, there is a list. The inventory of the estate is in the probate court in Metuchen. Yeah, it exists. I mean, it's an official court document. Yeah, and it's fascinating. I mean, to see it. Yeah. And there again is where I always go back to. She was savvy. Who ever heard tell of a daughter of a housewright, a daughter of a carpenter, having stocks in gold companies in Africa? I mean, she knew what she was doing, and she did. And the other thing too is, one of her early suitors was a banker in Boston, lived in Randolph. So and they maintained close contact. I imagine that he provided some background financial advice as well for investing purposes. Any other questions? Well, before I thank you, let me call your attention to my contact information. I check my email far too often, but it's brentlkendrick@gmail.com. And I mean, again, work you're doing, any ideas, if you come upon a letter, even if you decide to keep it, a photocopy would be great. If you know of other people, just kind of do a marriage, and I'd appreciate that. And I have a blog, thewiredresearcher.com. I'm waiting for the New York Times to find out about it, so I'll be featured as a bestseller, not. But, so as I mentioned, and there is a point to my commenting, I use it now for creative nonfiction essays. And I've ended up, the third book just came out this spring. But probably as I get a little closer to work in progress becoming forthcoming, I'll shift the focus, and it probably will focus more on big ticket items with Freeman. I did that. The blog started back in 2012 when I was working on the colonial American essays called The Humorist. And I did it as a research blog to tease students about the joy of research. And so week by week, I would share online, here's what I found. And I did that for 2 years. And in that 2-year period, I actually was able to identify the author. And for me, I can't think, well, I love teaching. I love research too. It's just such a joy to find something and figure it out. So yeah, check the blog out, thewiredresearcher.com. And so Freeman's story continues, and I think the conversation continues as well. And I really appreciate Hannah and all of your officers and all the members of your society. I thank you for the really important work that you're doing, and for including me, letting me be a part of it, because I don't get to talk too much about the research on my biography. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, we really appreciate the work that you're doing. And I suppose I have a very quick question. My question is,
yes.
Have you contacted any publishers? Do you have a time frame at all? I know you said forthcoming, but is this in the next few years?
I'm hoping that volume 1 will be out in 2 years.
Amazing. Great. I'm excited.
Yeah, and I want to answer your direct question. Trying to get through to Harper. I mean, you can't. You've got to have an agent. Try to get an agent to get you through to Harper. So I haven't. I had very decided, when I did the Infant Sphinx, just sharing information. When I did the Infant Sphinx, my first approach was University of Massachusetts Press, and they agreed and accepted it. But, I'm a kid out of graduate school wanting a book. And, they explained that they would have to find funding and that it might be 4 or 5 years before they could. And so I said, no, thank you, and ended up with Scarecrow. That's not to exclude the University of Massachusetts Press. For Green Mountain Stories, I was just determined it had to be a Vermont publisher, and it ended up being a Vermont publisher. So I'm pleased with that. So no, I haven't reached out to any. I would certainly welcome suggestions if anybody has any ideas of presses. Like I have presses in mind, but I haven't reached out yet. And Hannah, let me explain more fully. It's not just wanting the right publisher. I'm sensible enough that I really can't reach out until I can say, here's how many pages are in my manuscript for volume 1. I mean, they're not going to know at that point.
Yeah, I'm just being impatient, I think.
Oh no, that's okay. That's fine. I love it when people, I love my own impatience. I'm an unusual kind of scholar, I guess, because I've never felt a timetable. I do it and I'm dedicated to doing it, and I do it on my time frame. Luckily, now that I'm reinventing myself, I have more time on my plate, so I'm able to give this project. And now that the humorous essays are coming out in September, Freeman will be my focus. So I feel pretty good about that. Someone who has a drive like mine and actually loves keyboarding can do an awful lot in an 8-hour period of time.
Great.
So
well,
I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your work, and thank you for your talk this evening. I really appreciate it, especially because it was second time round. So thank you, and thank you to our audience for coming. It was a pleasure to meet you digitally, and I hope you all have a great evening.
Same to you. Thank you for the presentation. Very informative. I learned a lot.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Jeff, thank you again. Thanks, Hannah, as always.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.